Interior basement, medium shot, cops bust in. Iris's mom's lying on her back, grasping her stomach, shocked expression. Iris is lying face down. Blah, 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 blah. Camera slowly moves to shadow computer, the end, fade to black. Okay, so I was right. Right? Like, what did I say on page 6? I said... I said that we would get some sort of like reveal at the end, which, you know, whatever it was should have happened on page 3 or 4 to actually start the story. And that's exactly what happened. So this is something that happens all the time in first drafts where, you know, people will write these like long, ambiguous beginnings, and then they use the last 2 pages of their story to make like no characters take action until what, the 9th or 10th page of this, right? Like, or yeah, so he comes in on page 7 of a 9-page script, and so that's the first time anybody in the story like makes actual action, right? So if we're going to learn about this world, if we're going to learn about, you know, like you can build, there's a lot of stuff you can build on this. Like, okay, so this gives us this weird concept, and I don't even understand it completely because it's still very vague, but it just seems very like dystopian, obviously like medication and, you know, like sexual imagery, these sorts of things are part of this world. So like you can build on that, right? So like, let's see. Like, why not have, like, okay, so you take all this stuff that happens with Iris, you condense it to 3 pages. You say, what is the most important information in this 7 pages? What is the most important? And then you condense that down to 3 pages. You give the audience exactly what they need to know. You give them exactly where we are. You give them enough information to understand that this is, you know, this dystopian world, this and that. You can set up this whole sort of like sexual element with like, you know, Jared is supposed to be coming. Jared comes like page 3 or whatever. And then, you know, now we have our sort of inciting incident, our move into the, you know, the unfamiliar situation where Jared is the character taking action, right? So we're with this Iris character for the entire story, and then she just dies, which like isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's also like doesn't help us at all. I mean, we already barely was connected to the character because they're not doing anything. You know, Jared is the only character that, you know, makes any motion in the story, but then like it's immediately he stabs some people and then the story's over. So it's very much so what, but you can build off of this. Like you could build a philosophical conflict off of this dystopian world very easily, right? Like you could think about, you know, parallels between this and where we currently are, whether you wanted to go like the virus route, whether you wanted to go the, you know, like internet sexual imagery route. Like there's a lot of things you could do. And then you could use this dystopia and start to build a philosophical conflict. And then you can build this Iris character and this Jared character on top of that. And then you can start, you know, then you move Jared's major action up to page 3 or 4. And now we have like the setup for something that could actually be an interesting short film, you know? So, you know, this is why, like, I'm hoping that you guys are seeing how I'm looking at these, right? Because like, if he did this, you know, if he just made these like simple, large scale changes, you go from something that's boring, ambiguous, nothing happens until 70% through the story, to something that could potentially be engaging and actually philosophically interesting at the same time, right? So when you can actually understand how to see a script this way, like that is what is going to benefit you, right? Like let's compare this to let's see. How do I just trying to keep up with Chad a little bit. Yeah, the hook was the end. Exactly. Yeah, Travis, you're right. So like I legitimately called it. This happens so many times, you know, like, so I read these kinds of scripts all the time. That's the funny thing too, is that like, I mean, this can even apply to features a lot of the time as well. But for a lot of stories, it becomes like so much of like the same few major problems. Like we're not even, which this is like the whole point of my channel is like, we're talking fundamentals here, right? Like we're not talking, if you've written 6 features or 10 features and you're really deep into the weeds and this and that, then like those are different conversations you're going to have about what your story looks like, right? So I think what happens is a lot of people that are starting out, they hear or listen to like these professional writers talk about how they are viewing scripts and how they are viewing certain problems, and their problems are like leagues ahead of what your problems are going to be right now as like a newer writer, right? They're dealing with much more advanced issues because they, obviously anybody who's a writer is going to have times where they're going to be blinded by something that is simplistic, but by and large, they have their people their friends and their writer friends or whatever, who they send scripts to. They're getting feedback, blah, blah, blah. They have a pretty good idea of what's working and what's not. So their problems are going to be a little bit more advanced than what you may be dealing with right now. And so this is why I am focusing on, like, you're not really going to see me criticize people's dialogue that much, like, unless it's just straight up unreadable. But like, because dialogue, people put so much emphasis on dialogue, but dialogue is such a small part of your story. Like we're not even getting to dialogue yet. Like we need to get to, the fundamentals of your story, right? The philosophical conflict, the characters, how the momentum of the story is pushed forward. So dialogue becomes easier. So Alejandro is talking about saying dialogue is hard to write. Dialogue becomes significantly easier to write when you have the core of your story built out, right? So the problem, the reason that some people and you may be struggling with dialogue is because your character, like, you get to a scene and it's like, what are the wants of your characters here? What are their actions? What has happened before this? What's about to happen? Where's the philosophical conflict of your story? It's like, if you don't have clear answers to those questions, then of course you're going to have problems with dialogue. Like, think about how many films you've seen where like every single scene had like amazing dialogue. Like, obviously there's some like very stylistic directors and writers who you could say, like the Aaron Sorkins or the Quentin Tarantinos, where you could say, oh, their dialogue is very obviously stylistic, and you're really feeling the music of it and the wittiness of it, and that's fine. But like, largely, if you look at your favorite movies, a lot of them have just like good dialogue. Like, it's standard, it's good, it moves the story forward. It's not trying to be stylistic. Like, you don't necessarily remember, like, you don't necessarily like love the movie because the dialogue is perfect. You love the movie because the dialogue is good, works for the film, and you enjoyed the story. So, don't focus, my opinion would be, don't really try to focus on being stylistic with your dialogue. Focus on the fundamentals, Focus on philosophical conflict, focus on your characters, focus on the structure and the momentum of your story, and just getting a strong handle on that. Focus on your wants, your character's wants. When you get a strong handle on that, like, I'm telling you, so much will fall into place. And I think a lot of times writers believe that this will box them in, that it's too easy, I need to do something else and have 5 protagonists in my story or something. But no, like, when you can actually get that down, you will be surprised at how that sort of simplistic fundamentals will open an entire world for you to operate in. So this is Fun with Power. Let's go ahead and get into this.